the heart and soul behind every business. Stories. Welcome to Business Story of the Week, hosted by me, Joshua Laurie. From setbacks to comebacks, from tragedies to triumphs, we inspire entrepreneurs through conversations that matter. Witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. Whether it's your career, business, or life, your success is always one story away. This is Business Story of the Week.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sherry Hamby, and this is Business Story of the Week.
Fantastic. And that is the lovely Dr. Sherry Hamby today. She is our guest. And of course, my name is Joshua. I am your host. You already know me. And every day, every episode, every week, we ask you guys a question. And today's question is, oh, I love this question because it's perfect. It's really perfect for Dr. Sherry. And it's perfect for the audience too. The question is resilience something we're born with, or is it a skill that we can develop over time? Well, I believe Dr. Sherry is the perfect guest to answer that question today. Dr. Sherry Hamby is a distinguished research professor of psychology at the University of the South and director of LifePath Research Center. She focuses on strengths-based pathways to healing trauma and is the founder of Resilience Con. With numerous awards for her contributions to trauma psychology, Dr. Hamby's work has been featured widely in major media outlets. Her upcoming book, This Resilience Equation, explores resilience through science, clinical anecdotes, and her personal journey. And today, Dr. Sherry is going to be sharing all of us that today. Dr. Sherry, thank you for coming on the show. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me, Josh. I'm doing great, and I'm happy to be here.
Dr.
And
Sherry, oh, please go ahead.
I was going to say, I love your first question. That is one of my big messages that I am trying to get out there, because I think sometimes people do talk about resilience like it's something we're born with, or it's a personality trait, the same way that like extroversion or introversion might be. But it is absolutely a skill that we
Wow.
can get better at, and that everybody is going to need sooner or later.
Wow, I love that. I love how you said that a little bit there, like at the last. We're gonna need it sooner or later, and I feel like it's in a world where the situation where we are at right now. I feel like people are going to be need to be resilient, in the future, more resilient in the future, so to speak. Dr. Sherry, before we truly start getting into that, I want to lay the groundwork because it's important to know who Dr. Sherry is. It's important to know who our guest is, and what was the young Dr. Sherry like? This is all what I always ask, and how I always start off the show. What was the young Dr. Sherry like? Was she always resilient? What did she think about resilience? What would the young Sherry say to the Sherry of today?
I think young Sherry of today, I don't know. That's a good question. I would probably be a little surprised to see the Sherry of today. Probably also, I think I would seem impossibly old to the young Sherry. But I grew up in a home with,
Wise.
hopefully wiser. I grew up in a home with alcoholic and depressed parents, and so I really struggled a lot. I mean, that, as you know, can lead to a cascade of other problems. And so my childhood was pretty challenging in many ways. And I think that is one of the reasons why I got interested in psychology early on. And this probably is going to sound super corny, but I was of the generation when MASH was one of the most popular TV shows.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure most people know is the show about the doctors and nurses serving in the Korean War. And I was really inspired by that and how all of those people found ways to overcome trauma. And I was really inspired by the character of Dr. Sidney Friedman. And that was one of the reasons why I was like, wow, there are people who work on this trauma and don't just suffer it and can help people overcome it. So I got interested in becoming a psychologist when I was probably only 11 or 12 years old.
Wow, but that does feel like a pretty early on that you felt like, huh, this is a path that I'm going to take. This is a path that I'm going to this is a path I'm going to study. But Dr. Sherry, talk to us about why resilience in particular, and actually, to be more precise, your contributions in trauma psychology. Why that field in particular?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question because when I first got into graduate school, I was very interested in pushing back on some of the stereotypes of survivors of victimization because
Uh,
they often got portrayed as being very passive and kind of doomed in this life of depression and PTSD. But back when I was in graduate school in the 80s and 90s, I found it very hard to work from a strength-based framework, and I soon found myself getting sucked up in the dominant narrative of the time, which was all about how bad it is and how harmful it is for people. But over and over again, I just found myself talking to people who had been through sometimes really terrible traumas, and they didn't want to be seen just as victims. They wanted to be seen as survivors and the people who had more to them than this victimization. And slowly, I got the courage to start listening to these people and not worry so much about what my
mm,
professors or other researchers were
mhm.
thinking. And that's when I really shifted my work to focusing on resilience and pathways to healing.
I love that. I love it. And of course, I feel like we just need more people like that. We need more people like you, Dr. Sherry, especially in the world today that I feel like there's a lot more struggle. There's a lot more people who feel like they cannot be heard, who feel unseen, who feel like their trauma is not something to be, something to be shared, so to speak. But part of that telling that story is healing, and I think that is very important to have that avenue, and of course to have that study on how to move past those traumas, or to rather to navigate around those traumas as well. Dr. Sherry, how does trauma now, like this is my question, then as we start getting into this, how does trauma and resilience interact when it comes to the context of individual strength and community support? Of course, you talk about your focus on strength-based pathways. What is this exactly? And again, the how does trauma and resilience interact in that context? What are our individual strengths, and what is the strength of the community?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're touching on so many important points. And so I have this model, this idea I call the resilience equation. And there's really sort of two elements to it. On the one hand, there's the trauma and the things that are kind of dragging us down. And we do know that those are really harmful events. And not just in terms of psychology even, but even in terms of our long-term physical health, our immune systems, our inflammation. It puts us at higher risk for all kinds of diseases later in life, like heart disease and diabetes, cancer. But the great news about it is that you can also strengthen, you could add the pieces of a good life, and you can counter not only the psychological effects, but we're starting to collect data, really exciting data that shows that you can even heal some of the long-term physical effects of trauma too. And I look at it in terms of four different areas. And so two of them are individual areas. There's meaning making, so like telling your
Oh,
story, for example, as you
yes.
mentioned.
Uh-huh.
There's regulation, like being, having determination and perseverance. And there are also the interpersonal and environmental factors that you mentioned too, because obviously none of us really healed by ourselves. We almost all are getting help from other people.
I love that. I love that, Dr. Sherry. None of us heal by ourselves at all. I feel like it's impossible. How do you heal on your own? If you're not, no man is an island, and definitely you cannot be left alone in an island with all your traumas. Because what's going to happen is we're just going to ruminate in that trauma, right? We're just going to make it bigger. We're just going to make it like we're going to feel like it's just part of us, or like we're going to make it feel like it's that's just how it is. That's just life is, but it isn't. There's hope beyond that, and I feel like the study that you do, the work that you do, is precisely that. It's giving hope beyond that trauma, and that is where resilience comes in, I believe. Dr. Cherry, if resilience were a muscle, how would you recommend it to train it in order to grow stronger?
Sure, that is a great question. And there are a lot of the exciting thing about it is that we can bring in some of the things we've learned from the positive psychology movement. And it turns out that a lot of those tools really help us with overcoming trauma too. So you've already mentioned one of them, telling your story. I definitely think that that is the first important step. But there's also all of this, what I call breath and body work, so things like mindfulness, even
Yes.
exercise, we now know helps with depression and anxiety just as much as medication or therapy. And also, again, just to push the environmental piece of it, when you train, you do have to make sure that you're training in the right environment too. And
Huh.
so I think in terms of resilience and healing from trauma, that means making sure that you're getting access to green spaces or what people call blue spaces, which is just spending time by the ocean or on a
Wow.
lake. That reconnecting with the natural world can also be an incredibly healing force that we are just, of course, people have known this for a long time, but we are finally starting to collect some really exciting scientific data that shows how
Mhm.
that's working.
I love that. And of course, a lot of this, correct me if I'm mistaken, Dr. Sherry, a lot of this that I'm hearing is almost a lot of it is healing. Exercise, mindfulness, green space. I love that you call it blue space, by the way. I think that's the first time I've ever heard it. Like, of course, it's a blue space, a wide open sky, the sun, the ocean, the lake. Why not? Why not? It's a beautiful, beautiful space to be in, very relaxing. Those are things that heal us. But Dr. Sherry, when it comes to particularly to resilience, when we're in it, so to speak, when we're in the thick of it, we're experiencing the trauma, we're experiencing the, or we've already experienced it and it's still affecting us post trauma. My question is how do we develop that type of resilience? And further on, I have a follow up question to this. Is but more like you said, like we're going to need resilience later on. But right now, you talk about. I feel like you talk a little bit more about the healing aspect of it. But now, what if we're in the thick of it? What if we're experiencing it right now, and we've never developed resilience whatsoever? So do we just let ourselves experience it and then hope that we're going to come out of it resilient?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's a question that I'm getting more and more often because people
Hmm.
are realizing, like you said, that a lot of the early research on resilience, it was all focused on what seemed like a single incident, a
Yeah.
flood or an assault, and that there's kind of a hard end to it. The waters
Hmm.
recede, the flood is gone, and now you can work on your resilience. But we realize that there are a lot of people in a lot of situations, all the way at the individual level, maybe from someone who's getting stalked or something like that, to some of the global crises you mentioned, like refugees and, uh, natural, climate change and the pandemic and things like that that we can't completely get away from. I do think that a lot of the answers are the same. This is something we're only really starting to study. But I think the key thing is that you've got to find a way to acknowledge the reality of what you're going through, run for your life when you need to run for your life, for
Of course.
sure. But at the same time, the damaging part comes from the chronic stress, the wear and tear of our
Right.
body on being under chronic stress. And
Right.
so a lot of these things, tools like mindfulness, like finding safe spaces to talk to people about what you're going through.
Right.
These things will help keep your arousal down, even if you're going through ongoing kinds of trauma that you can't fully escape in the moment.
It almost sounds like in the middle of it, in the moment of it, you really need to mitigate the damage. Because if you just completely let yourself run out, like let it all overcome you, I feel like you're gonna come out of it more damaged than you are resilient. so to speak. You couldn't come out of it as if like, you didn't handle it better, so to speak. But you could definitely have handled it better. Like you said, talk to other people, talk to people who can help, and mindfulness, all those practices, making sure that it doesn't get to you, it doesn't chronically stress you. Dr. Sherry, my follow up question to that is, when you talk about, we're gonna need resilience sometime soon, very, very soon. Yeah, well, hopefully not very soon, because again, like the disarray that's happening in the world and that's happening in our personal lives is all affecting us. I feel like the balance between the peace and inner peace and outer turmoil, that's just that the pendulum is swinging towards, it's affecting us a lot. It's almost like we're being forced to be resilient, right? You talk about people needing resilience sooner than later, but also, what about the people who actually have had a, let's call it like a nice life, right? Like a good life. Like they didn't have to struggle so much. Maybe their biggest trauma was probably, I don't know, being sent off in college and university away from home, something like that. I'm not trying to say that some trauma are smaller or bigger, but some of these things, um people approach things differently. But say, never had to go through some sort of massive disaster, so to speak. how, how would those people develop resilience if they never went through anything that is quite drastic?
Yeah, I mean, I do think one of the things that has happened in the last 20 years or so of research on trauma is that we are starting to realize that almost everybody gets exposed to some kind of trauma sooner or later. And a lot of it, I think we are starting to appreciate in terms of dose. So we only had, there are a few people walking around at zero, but it's a pretty small percentage. But maybe only one or two things have happened versus like 15 or 20. And that is going to drive a lot of how much you're able to respond. Because this is also, uh, I'd say, part of the question you led off with about whether it's a personality trait or something
Mhm.
like that. And to me, you don't really need resilience until you have something to overcome. And so
Yeah.
that way, I really don't think of it as being part of your personality at all. And, if you're just one of those extremely lucky people, that's probably only 2 or 3% of the population that's walking around at zero. Well, congratulations, you kind of won the
Congratulations.
trauma lottery. But I think they'll need other kinds of coping skills to, deal with when they get a flat tire or whatever. But I don't think that I wouldn't talk about what they're going through in terms of resilience.
I love when you call it a trauma lottery. I mean, wow, congratulations! Because for some of us, we're like, I feel like I have too much trauma. You might want to take some of these, maybe. You want the trauma lottery. But again, like to me, it was a side of my curiosity, so to speak. Because again, like you said, the majority of people, I feel, the majority of population, we just don't have a choice. We just go through it. Like we're talking about, talk about poverty. The majority of a population that is in like impoverished, like they didn't have that choice, and they're just being forced to be resilient right now. And it's just it's such a very interesting field that you are studying right now, Dr. Sherry. And of course, in your book, that is the new book that you have right now. The upcoming book that you have right now is called The Resilience Equation. My question here now is, talk to us a little bit about the book, of course. Talk to us a little bit about that. But in the book, how do you balance the science of trauma, so to speak, with an innate, like it's just innate, right? It's a skill that you develop over time. It's not something that you can measure, or can it be measured now? And again, how do you balance both of that? And talk to us a little bit about your book.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question. I do think that it is something that you can develop as a skill. And like you said, you can also make use of external resources. It's really
Mm-hmm.
important to think about community resilience too, and what can we do in terms
Mhm.
of policy or healthcare access or things like that are going to help
Right.
people overcome trauma. So the book kind of walks through all of those different sections and talks about the individual types of skills you can build, but also the community resources that we all need, and more emphasis on the common good. But I do think, I guess one thing I want to say about the book is that I do think that you can definitely measure these skills and measure resilience, and there's been a ton of research on that.
Wow.
But I do feel like we haven't invested enough in learning about all the different pathways to healing. So the book does talk some about the science and trying to, well, or more what the science has to tell us. I'm trying not to go into too many scientific details, even though I'm a total science nerd myself.
Please, why not? Let's do it.
But it also talks some about some of the things I've learned just from talking to people, and
Mhm.
sometimes in these extremely tough circumstances. And it's amazing. I mean, the human capacity to put together a good life, even for people who've just had massive trauma exposure, never ceases to amaze me. And I think there are so many underappreciated strengths and underappreciated pathways to healing out there. And that is one of the things that still, after 30 years in this field, drives my interest in it, is there's always something new and surprising for me to learn about how people have managed to heal.
I love that. I mean, I agree. It's fascinating how resilient the human body is, not just the human mind actually, is how strong it is, how much it's fascinating how much damage the human body, this vessel that we have, how much damage it can take. But I think it's twice, 10 times more fascinating how much our mind can take, how much our mind can adjust. And again, it's a very interesting field, and it's a very interesting topic right now. That's why I was very excited about this episode and this interview. Dr. Sherry, of course, to all our audience and listeners out there, again, the title of the book is The Resilience Equation. And I invite everyone to go check that out right now. Before we truly start wrapping this up, of course, Dr. Sherry, you were talking about earlier, before we started, we were talking about the penguin life, rather. I mean, that was a so to speak, the pub the with the book, related to the book, so to speak. But you also have a another endeavor, which is the Resilience Con, which is under the Life Path Research. Talk to us a bit about that, the Life Path Research Center. What does it do, and what is the Resilience Con all about?
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for asking about that. So Resilience Con is my baby. It's my pet project. And
Wow.
because going back to what, when you were asking me about my training, like I said, I realized in graduate school that it was very hard to find spaces to take these strength-based approach. So I've created a conference that is really oriented towards social workers, therapists, other researchers like myself, students. We have tons of students, so that they get spaces where they can present their own work on strengths-based approaches to healing and prevention, and that they can gather in a place where it's okay not to be all doom and gloom all the time, and talk about our belief in the power to heal. And we meet every April in Nashville, and it's
Wow.
really the high point of my year. So I would certainly invite anybody listening to consider checking that out. It is a wonderful and uplifting space that really renews my commitment to the work every year.
Well, I love that. And of course, the website, ladies and gentlemen, is lifepathresearch.org. And the way you talk about Resilience Con is just, it's amazing. It's like, feels like a great place to be in. It's surrounded with people who are supportive. I feel like it's a place to share your stories, to hear other stories, so you gain that courage to tell yours as well. I think it's lovely what you do. Once again, website is liferesearch.org. Go check that out. And Dr. Sherry, your book is about to come out, The Resilience Equation. Where can we find it, and where else can we connect with you?
That will be coming out on Penguin Life, hopefully sometime in late 2025 or early 2026 in the US, and also has British and Spanish publications coming out soon. And you can find me on Facebook or on Blue Sky, or as you said, to check out my my websites. If you just Google my name, it will take you to all those things.
Fantastic, of course. And to all our audience and listeners out there, I feel like this has been a very, very profound episode, very important information that we put out there. And I'm glad that I got to share this platform with you, Dr. Sherry, for you to share your experience and, of course, get to share your insight here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Josh. This has been a delightful conversation.
Fantastic. I feel the same. And of course, to all our audience and listeners out there, I hope you guys feel the same. I hope you found hope. If this interests you, go check out Dr. Sherry's book, Dr. Sherry's website, and of course, you have friends and your friends and family out there that you feel this might help. Make sure to share them. This episode is very, very important. I think, is a very, very significant episode and information that we all need to know. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, Dr. Sherry. I hope you enjoyed this as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Gentlemen, thank you for watching the episode. We will see you on the next one. Bye bye.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.